That's what Paul
We're
McCartney.
live, or so it says. Hello, everybody. Science and engineering triumphs over ignorance and superstition once again. How's everybody today?
Hanging in there in isolation. Everything going okay? This is Dave Eicher. We have Jeff, the eminent Jeff Hester, and the distinguished Allison Klesman with us today. We're still stuck inside. We're stuck inside, and we want to talk about some things, and we're scientists. And I think, Allison, you're going to jump right into cosmology right away and talk about why we haven't figured out the Big Bang.
First, I'm looking at two different backgrounds behind you guys. I am curious as to why the change.
Well, I moved because I switched computers, and now I've got a nice big work computer that I went into the office when there was no one else there and got it and brought it home. And this is the best place to set it up. So I'm now in my second bedroom where everything else is, apparently.
Weren't we talking last time about it was inevitable that you were going to move into your second bedroom and make it an office?
Something like that. So I moved in there and clearly has not transformed into anything but a mess yet, but.
Okay, all right. I still want clairvoyance points for that.
And I moved closer to my router and away from a lot of books, but closer to fake Van Goghs and Renoirs.
Yeah, you've got the pictures behind you. We were watching, I don't know who that, we were watching some, cable news show the other night where everybody, of course, is broadcasting from home these days.
Yeah.
And somebody was sitting there in front of a bunch of pictures, and my wife just turned to me and said, I can't look at this, because there was this really lovely picture behind, but the way the person who was talking was framed it just looked like there was a picture of somebody behind him with somebody sticking their butt in the side of his face. So it pays to look.
Background matters.
When there's chaos on the networks, you really have no pressure whatsoever doing this here.
None.
Anything can happen. It's all okay.
Anything can happen. Allison, cosmology.
Right. Where to start? Well, so I guess probably the easiest place to start is that this comes out of the latest issue of Astronomy, which I will plug right here. So we have an article by Dan Hooper.
Oh my God, me too.
Look at that! Which arrived in the mail since we didn't get them in the office like we normally do.
How are you gonna send them out when the postal service is dead?
Internet, I guess. Digital editions.
We're going to hire everyone who works at what used to be my favorite restaurants to run them around, I think.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
Too soon?
There's my mail. Anyway, so we've got the cover story in it is that there's this mystery going on, that we have the theory of the Big Bang, which is the current leading theory of how the universe started. But there are problems. So most of the data that we have now fits this theory very, very well, but not all of it, which is a problem because you want everything to fit nicely.
You don't.
And it
That's
doesn't.
no
Some of us want everything
fun.
to fit nicely.
No, that's no fun. That's the whole point.
Well, so I guess this is much more fun. Cosmology just got more fun. There you go. I guess I'm trying to think of how the best way to start here. One of the most, I guess, popular issues, I don't know if that's really the word I want to use, and that I think a lot of people have heard about very recently, is that there's this tension in the Hubble constant. So the Hubble constant is basically describing how fast the universe is expanding. And you would think that no matter how you measure that constant, it should be the same. The problem is that is not true. And for a long time, there are several different ways to measure this constant. But for a long time, the uncertainty in how you would measure this overlapped. So it was like, well, we aren't getting exactly the same answer. We might be getting 67 or 70, but the uncertainty in those numbers is large enough that it's probably going to meet in the middle somewhere. Unfortunately, that is no longer true. So there is one method of determining how fast the universe is expanding, which involves looking at supernova explosions. So the farther and farther away a supernova is, the fainter and fainter it should be. And we know that these are all exactly the same brightness. So the brightness that you see is only related to how far away the object is. So if you take a light bulb and keep moving it further away, it's going to get fainter. But those are still looking relatively locally in the universe, cosmically speaking.
I have to interject here for a second, though. Show my age here for a minute. Saying there's this huge uncertainty, we're not sure whether it's 67 or 70. All right, so we're talking about what, maybe a 5%. When I was a graduate student, people were going fisticuffs over a factor of 2.
Oh yeah.
On this thing. And so
I think we were at 50 and 100 when
it was 50 and 100, and it
exactly.
was Alan Sandage versus Gerard de Vaucouleurs.
Yep.
In a steel cage death match.
Yes.
If you will, over that.
Yeah. And of course, when Hubble's first number was off by what, a factor of 5 or something like that, I forget. In fact, this thing should not be called the Hubble law.
Right.
I mean, it should not be called and in fact, it's now what do they refer to it? I suddenly lost the other guy's name, which
Hubble,
I can't pronounce it because it's French. I can spell it for you.
Spell it, remind me.
It's Lemaitre.
Lemaitre, sure, yes. Thank you very much.
Georges Lemaitre, the Belgian priest.
Yes. Because if you actually go back, I used to do this with students. If you actually go back and look at what we now see as a plot of Hubble expansion and the amount of scatter around it just because of peculiar velocities, and then you put the region of space that Hubble could look at it on there, it turns out that there is absolutely no way that he really could have measured expansion, because the region of space and the range of velocities that he was looking at were small compared with what just the scatter in. And so that was a case where we sort of got dumb lucky that we were in a place where locally it happened to look like everything was moving. Well, of course, Andromeda.
Except Andromeda, right?
Yeah, okay, anyway.
Almost everything. But you're
Almost
right.
everything.
I mean, Hubble has gotten an enormous amount of credit. He gets credit for discovering the expanding universe, which happened a decade beforehand at Lowell, V.M. Slipher. And he gets a lot of credit for doing a lot of things, given how he frankly wasn't a very nice guy either.
Are those two things necessarily at odds with each other? That's the question. That's maybe a question for a different podcast. Yeah.
He was a little crabby, but that is for a different time. So we have all these problems fundamentally with the Big Bang. And then we also have to assume and rely and hope and pray that cosmic inflation took place.
Yes.
And we have to wonder what in the heck dark matter and dark energy are. We have no idea whether axions exist and could explain dark matter. WIMPs seem like they're on the outs. And if anyone has any clue whatsoever what dark energy is, you're in for an automatic Nobel Prize. So we've got a few issues yet, don't we?
Right. Those are the 3 big ones: are the constant, the inflation, and.
Although I have to interject here in talking about this, you have to be careful, because there are people who hear that and say, "Oh, well, gee, I guess that means that we don't need to worry about the Big Bang anymore because those scientists, they're always just wrong," so on and so forth. And it's like, no, that's not the way that it works. It's not like our picture of the Big Bang is wrong. It's that the Big Bang is a very, very, very well-tested theory. And for people who don't understand it, in science, theory is what you call something that makes lots of testable predictions, and those testable predictions are correct. And a well-corroborated theory is sort of the pinnacle of what humans can have by way of knowledge. And so we get ourselves in trouble with the way that we use the word.
Most everyone, when they say theory, what they mean is hypothesis.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah. Or what they mean, sometimes I give talks about this, and what I say is that when they say theory, what they mean is a wag. You know what a wag is?
That's the thing that a dog's tail used to do when he followed me out into the observing.
You know what, Allison, you know what a wag is?
I've heard the term.
A wag is a wild ass guess. When most people talk about theory, what they think of is, I have this theory that, if only such and such a team would play such and such a person, then they'd win the Super Bowl every year for the next 47 decades or something. You know, that's not a theory, that's a wag. And when scientists talk about theories, they mean something. We mean not they. That's we. We mean something very different.
Right.
You know,
Well,
you're making, sorry, go ahead,
let's
Alan.
do that theory and law, because a lot of people in the public think unless it's a law, it's not well corroborated. And that is
Right.
Right.
because
And then you get into facts. You know, everybody goes, yes, it's a fact that Earth revolves around the sun. Actually, it is a very, very well corroborated theory that Earth revolves around the sun. You know, it makes so many testable predictions that turn out to be correct. And so eventually these things that we talk about as theories, eventually we just get around to calling them facts. And yeah, that's the way that works. But
You know, it makes me, there are two comments I have there with that, if I can quickly. It makes me think of the great Coen brothers movie, A Serious Man, you know, that centers on an academic teacher. And there's this great scene where he was talking about Schrodinger's cat, you know, and he fills an enormous blackboard full of equations, you know, this step, that step, dozens of words right on down the line about the existence or not. And so the conclusion there is, you know, as he turns around to the shot showing this enormous blackboard full of equations, is that in the end, we really don't know what's happening at all. That's the only thing we can be certain of, you know.
You know, in the end, the only thing that I'm certain of is you guys could be golems. You guys could be figments of my imagination. You know, that becomes an interesting, again, another show to do is how in the world do you get from solipsism, this notion that the only thing that exists is what's inside of my head, to making statements about knowledge about the rest of the world. But yeah,
I will pose that there are facts, and that this, not a scientist, but a politician, and a pretty good one, and not the most popular guy in the world in Boston, you know, when he defended the Boston Massacre defendants. But John Adams, you know, said famously that facts are stubborn things. And whether it be the existence of the Big Bang, although we don't understand the details, although science is a self-correcting process in terms of the details over time, the Big Bang we know happened. Don't say the Big Bang didn't happen to Bob Wilson at Starmus. You know, he's an older gentleman now, but he won't like you. You know, but in 1964, we found out that the Big Bang happened. And it's been details since then. But, you know, what do we do with the facts that exist now in a world where we're going through this extraordinary situation? And in many cases, the facts are being ignored.
Yeah, indeed. The thing is, and this is something that we as scientists understand that is somehow lost on people. Yeah, it's you stand up and you say things, magical thinking, wishful thinking, you throw rhetoric at this stuff, but somehow reality just doesn't care. You know, if you throw rhetoric and wishful thinking and magical thinking at physical reality, you know, physical reality, metaphorically speaking, just laughs in your face and, you know, runs over you like a steamroller. And if that happens slowly enough, you can pretend for a while. Like people pretend, oh, we don't need to worry about that climate change stuff and so on and so forth, which is also many other shows. But the thing that's going on with COVID is that it's happening fast enough that when somebody says, oh, this is just a little flu and it's all just a hoax and it's going to magically go away by April, and then a few weeks later you look up and you know, there are millions of cases and hundreds of thousands of deaths and so on and so forth. That's kind of reality tapping you on the shoulder and saying, I really don't care what you say or what would be convenient for you. Reality is reality.
What do you think, Allison, on this?
I mean, yeah, that's a very good point. I think there are still people that are that are in the denial phase. But yeah, I completely lost my train of thought there. I think as scientists, especially, the goal kind of is to make your theory match reality. That's what you're trying to do. So reality is whatever it is. And as scientists, you posit a theory, you have these ideas, and then you want to test them until and tweak your theory until it matches what's actually happening. And that's really all science. And I guess kind of when I try to describe, especially math to people, all math is trying to just describe the world around us. That's really all you're trying to do with it. All those crazy equations, and you can fill boards with them. All you're trying to do is just say, this is what happens when you drop a pebble into water. This is what happens when you throw a baseball or something. And it's very similar with this disease too, in a way, is that when we started out, we had no information about this disease. And now as we get more data, as we get more information, then you can kind of tweak your understanding of how this disease works and how susceptible people are, and things like that, and death rate and everything like that. You can tweak your understanding of that to match what is actually happening, because that's going to happen whether your theory is correct or not. And that's part of the difficulty, I think, because again, we're lacking tests. We don't have the data that we need to really understand this. And I was just reading something this morning. I can't remember if it was New York Times or Science, but it was trying to understand immunity to this disease. Because again, with some coronaviruses, you're immune for life, and other ones you aren't. Maybe you're going to be immune for a year and then your immunity drops. Or maybe if you don't have a strong response to this disease, maybe if you get it and you're a carrier and you never know that you had it, you may be susceptible to infection again, even though you've already had it. So it kind of brings up these questions. And again, we just don't have the answer yet as to the antibody testing. Now they're kind of touting this as this is the holy grail. If we know who's had it already, then we can let them go back to work. Is that true? Will they actually be immune to it? We don't know. It's kind of, it obviously complicates matters a lot.
Let me ask you both this, if I may, quickly, to interject. Because there's a lot of skepticism with people about this, and we live in a world now, we're doing it right now, where we see so much remotely, and rather than in our own physical little worlds here, now we're doing it all remotely for the moment, but we see things on television. It's off, it's afar, this is happening, it's wherever it is. This stuff really doesn't touch someone's own life in a specific way. That maybe feeds that sort of disbelief or skepticism a little bit. I have on social media, on Facebook, for example, there are a lot of people who I don't know well, but they're my Facebook friends because they're magazine readers. And I try to be very open and share things with people and this and that and what's going on with astronomy and pictures. But over the last week, I've started to see a lot of people who I don't really know well on Facebook, but they're acquaintances or readers who are now losing relatives, people are dying now over the last week. Quite a number of examples. I think this is really starting to hit home that this is really, no one has any immunity.
Yeah.
If it's just off somewhere else in another part of the world.
Yeah.
This is going to affect or infect us all eventually. We're all going to be exposed to this at some point down the road.
Well, the thing, I think you're right. It's hard to really remember how early we are into this thing. We're only a few weeks into this thing. And if you look historically at pandemics are not few week activities. Pandemics are things that stretch out over long periods of time. And you're right. People are going to start feeling this. It's one thing to say, "Hey, let's open everything back up again," and this is all so on and so forth, until you find yourself in a situation where your grandmother or your spouse or your child or whoever is in the hospital and is dying. And let's face it, COVID is not a fun way to go. I won't bring it too far down, but I deal with this in part by getting interested in things, and I have gotten interested in the way that COVID really works. And if we wanted to talk about things like cytokine storms and what they do to the body, and so this is not something that you want to go through. And you don't want to go through what it's like to then have your life, even if you survive it, have the rest of your life sort of I don't really want to have to wear an oxygen mask to go from sitting on the couch watching the television into my bed. You know, it's bad news.
Mhm.
But as it starts actually affecting people, I suspect that we're going to see a lot of attitudes change. And, you know, things now, like you have these groups of people that get together and say, we're all going to get together in close proximity and make a big show out of our right to get together instead. First of all, every day is Darwin Day. You know, what can you say? But when I look at those people, my immediate thought is, fine, you want to do that, I go do that somewhere, but don't get close to anybody else. And when you get sick, you don't get to go to the hospital. When you get sick, you need to go and you need to knock on somebody else's door who is at this event, cough in their face a little bit, and then let them take care of you. You know, and of course, repeat as necessary.
I think one of the biggest problems that we're still facing is that essentially, if we do everything right, it won't affect people as much as we're afraid it will.
Right.
And people will say, then why were we worried?
Right.
It's kind of a catch-22. The idea is to look like we overreacted so that nothing happens.
Right. Yeah.
And so when things are actually going well and people aren't getting sick and, you know, your community manages to have no new cases, everyone's like, well, then what's the big deal? Why don't we just open everything up again? And so I think that's
But what
kind
is
of part of the
that?
problem.
What is that about that lack of understanding? You know, I think a lot of people don't believe in viruses because they can't see them. You know,
Or they just
and
don't think it's going to be as bad as it is. They really
because
believe that whole, you know, it's only people over the age of 80 are going to die or something. And that's certainly not true.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and again, the math of it, they don't, this thing, because it's novel, everybody, when this thing came along, was susceptible to it, which means that when it found its way to the shores of the United States, long after it had found its way everywhere else, giving us plenty of time to prepare for it and do things right, all of which we completely squandered because we don't believe in science. Okay, I'll come back. If you look at it, there were 330 million people in the United States who were susceptible to this. You arguably won't actually establish herd immunity until something like 250 million of those have had it or are immune. And even if you say that the mortality rate is 1%, which is a little bit low, at that point, you're still talking about something around 2.5 million deaths. And so if you don't do something about this, if you don't do what we're doing right now, then it's like dropping a bomb on Houston or something. That's effectively what you've done. But what that also means is that, okay, maybe in the current wave, maybe 100,000 people are going to die. And maybe that means that a few million will have had it and survived and be out there. That still means that there are going to be something like maybe 320 million people after this first wave who are susceptible to it. Mm-hmm. And so what we're seeing right now is a little bit of a brush fire that we've mostly managed to put out. And now we're going to do something idiotic enough to say, oh, well, I guess it's all right now. And, move back into the house where the upstairs is still on fire or something because the downstairs looks like it's okay, and pretend that it's all going to be all right. And that's just idiocy.
Wait a minute. Are you claiming that people should be familiar with mathematics as well as science?
Allison, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Do you remember the 1980s, I forget the brand of the shampoo, but the shampoo commercial where the actress is holding up the shampoo and says, I told two friends and they told two friends and so on and so on.
It's Heather Locklear, I think.
Vaguely familiar.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
That's what viruses are.
Yep.
And it's nothing until all of a sudden, over a matter of a few days, the whole world has it. And people say, gee, I never would have expected that. And that's because you weren't thinking about it. Anyway. But yeah, so we're in this situation where we're talking about, let's open everything up again. And oh, wouldn't it be great? And oh, we have to do this to save the economy. You open everything up right now again, you wind up with a second wave of this thing that could in principle make the current wave of this thing look like peanuts. And that's going to be good for the economy. I just don't get the thinking. Yeah, all right, I will now step down off of my soapbox. Get me going on this and I will carry on all day. It's just craziness.
It's short term versus long term, and it's very hard to kind of switch tacks. Especially people in general tend to think about very short term things. It's just the way that people do. Even when you talk about say climate change or weather or something, the general populace has a memory of what, like 5 years, and after that, you don't remember anymore. So maybe it was hotter 6 years ago, but you don't remember that because that was 6 years ago, and this is now super hot and life's horrible. So I think that time scale has almost been crunched even further with something like this, where it's happening very quickly, and you assume, okay, once it's over, and everything will be fine again. And you have to think long term, the larger scale. Even if this dies out in spring and summer, if it comes back in fall, that's still a problem. I realize that's a problem for future us 6 months from now, but maybe we should care about that.
Only if you have human empathy. Right. If, what we're finding is that human empathy is apparently a really bad thing for the economy. That's what we're being told.
Well, that is generally true.
These people lining up and saying, I would be more than happy to die so that somebody who already has lots and lots of money can put more money into their stock portfolio or something. I just don't get that. I just don't get that.
So do we do meetings this summer and fall? Do we open the NFL season with teams that play and their televised games with no fans in attendance? I heard the baseball folks talking about the potential of doing baseball games that way today, of playing the games with no fans in stadiums.
Yeah.
If you want to, I think, again, you're going to have to kind of compromise. I mean, people aren't going to accept, no, there will never be any football games again. So again, maybe this is a good intermediate step, between no football games and, filling a stadium with people that are going to get sick.
Yeah.
I think you have to minimize your risk. And that's a good way to minimize the risk and still carry on if you need to.
It's one thing, though, to talk about that in the context of football games. It's another thing entirely to talk about in the context of things like schools, for example.
Yeah.
And boy, here's another one that really, I need to drink more, I think. I'm kind of serious.
What do each of you say on the odds for opening the fall school session in schools in the United States of America with kids physically there together?
I think it's very likely, honestly. Whether it's smart or not, I don't know, but I think it's very likely. So
I think the likelihood depends a great deal on what we do in the short run. It's if we really open things up as quickly as people are talking about, then the second wave of this thing is going to hit in time to prevent that from happening. If we do open it up, it's known that schools are huge places for passing around contagion, so that'll make it worse. The thing that annoys me, though, I've been paying fairly close attention to this, and people started talking about when are we going to open schools, and so the CDC came out and did a very thorough, okay, from a public health standpoint, what does it mean to open schools? And they came out with a long list that clearly showed they had never been inside an elementary school, that, you can't have people shaking hands or undergoing physical contact, and you have to constantly be cleaning surfaces, and you can't have groups any larger than such and such mixing. And so that means that you have to phase how people come to school in the morning and how they leave. And you can't have assemblies and you can't have recesses. And, you know, if you really look at it and say, we are trying to keep from spreading this disease, that's what you have to do. And that's a real honest to goodness science grounded public health assessment of what it takes to safely open schools. Until suddenly it was announced that, oh, schools are going to be the first things to open. You know what the CDC did in response to that? They changed their guidelines so that now the guidelines kind of say, yeah, teachers sort of have to wash their hands. And you kind of have to put a poster on the wall that says, these are symptoms of COVID. And it's probably good if the cleaning crews, you know, use something disinfectant when they clean the rooms at night. And you probably have an emergency plan in case it gets out of hand again. But yeah, apart from that, you can pretty well open them up. And it's like, wait a minute. It's the fact that there is now a desire to open schools sooner does not mean that suddenly the virus is behaving differently. It goes back to the earlier conversation about if you try to throw rhetoric or ideology at reality, reality just, you know, laughs at you and kicks you where it counts.
So let me ask this to the two of you then, if I might, as a follow-up. So is it inevitable, really, given that the vast majority of the population, so far as we know, has not yet been exposed? Do we, given that there's been a little bit of a wave and there's a push to open things up quickly so that the economy doesn't implode, at least in the views of some, as badly or worse as the Great Depression, there's overconfidence, perhaps, from many in that you know, getting people back into a more normal situation will not lead to a catastrophe. Is it, and those factors and more, is it inevitable that really we're heading, regardless of what happens, however things evolve over the coming weeks, are we headed for an inevitable individual immune system test for tens and hundreds, countless millions of people are going to really be exposed to this, and it's going to be an individual test on how your immune system reacts, and a lot of people are going to get really sick and a lot of people are going to get a little bit sick, and you know, the roulette wheel is going to spin, and that's how it's going to be. Is that inevitable regardless of when we go back? Because I don't think that we can all stay isolated permanently until there's a vaccine and we all get a vaccine. And even that is not really necessarily a silver bullet in all respects.
Allison.
I think that's possible. I think it is very possible.
We're really, you know, we're going to be tested en masse as a nationality and around the world here in a very dangerous way, over whether it's next month or at the end of this year or next year. However this is done, a lot of people are going to be exposed to this.
Right.
You know, Dave, I'm going to push back on that picture.
I'm not saying that.
There are people who make that. There are people who make that argument and say, well, why don't we just let it all happen?
An argument for you know, all getting together and have a party tonight, you know. But I'm saying that even if we manage things well and minimize the deaths, there's going to be risk sooner or later for a lot of people. Obviously, we want to make things as constructive and minimize the death and destruction as much as possible, of course.
Okay, let's take it apart in pieces. Let me address the economy thing first.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
We can go. Come on. If addressing the economy thing, if you look at what has happened over the last basically 40 years, going back to 1980, over the last 40 years, the average productivity of an American worker has gone up by over a factor of 2. It is more than double in real dollars. Despite that fact, the the compensation, the wages of the average worker have remained flat. And so we've got this situation where the reality is that you could have 50% unemployment and still actually producing as much per capita as you were 40 years ago. That's just fact. In addition to that, we're at a point where there are lots of things going on between artificial intelligence, automation, so on and so forth, that are driving that number up. People for a while have been talking about, hyperproductivity is coming. And as hyperproductivity comes, we're going to have to deal with the fact that we simply do not need everyone working to produce everything that we need. And so the notion that this thing has to lead to a Great Depression is frankly absurd. If it leads to a Great Depression, it will be because we lacked the imagination and the will to adapt to the times. And so there are a lot of things that would have to change. There are a lot of things that are going to change anyway. But the fact of the matter is that saying everybody needs to go back to work so that they can die for the economy, they're not dying for the economy. They are dying for the people who currently are at the top of the heap. Because the thing that has to change if we're going to weather COVID in a sensible way is the way that we organize the economy. And there are so many things that are different. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. You compare it to the Great Depression. In the Great Depression, you could not have 3 people sit there in their homes and have this kind of conversation and do their work. You guys are producing a magazine from home, for crying out loud. We're AIs can drive trucks around the country, or we're headed in that direction. We just live in a different world than we lived in the past when we hit these kinds of things. We do not have to have anything like a Great Depression if we are willing to actually say we're going to use our ingenuity and our technology and all of those kinds of things to reorganize our economy so that it fits the world that we find ourselves in. And since downstream, the way that I look at it is what's happening now is we have something that's forcing our hand to maybe do a whole bunch of things that were inevitable anyway, in a lot of respects.
But the time scale is simply sped up, perhaps.
The time scale sped up.
Yeah.
But as far as people getting it, if, and this is a huge if we can stay shut down seriously for long enough to get this down to the point where now you can count cases, where you've gotten the reproduction number down below 1 so that the thing isn't blowing up on you, that you tell 2 friends and they'll do 2 friends thing. And so that it's small enough that now you can control it by doing contact tracing and those kinds of things. It's not going to be back to normal, but we can get to a point even before a vaccine where we are interacting and we're out and around and we're being careful. We just have to be smart about it. Running back into the house just because we want to, even though that we know half of it's still on fire, that's just stupid.
Allison, this is we're never going to quite have the world in every way, shape, and form that we had 4 months ago.
Right.
When things normalize, whenever that is, however gradually or quickly it happens, what do you think? How do you think the world might be a little bit different in the future permanently? Have you thought about that a little bit?
Honestly, I think things are going to just go back to normal. I really do.
Really?
I think
Really?
Not because they should, but I think there's a lot of pushback against changing the status quo among the people that are in charge. And I think it's just going to be very difficult to, again, I think it's almost a matter of momentum. Can you actually get whatever current regimes are in charge of every country, not just ours, but any country, can you get them to actually acknowledge that we need to make permanent changes and get that legislation through?
will the United States actually, will the people really be okay if a year from now we've seen 2.5 million deaths? Are they going to be okay?
It might not
with
be
that?
okay, but will the people that are the ones in charge be okay with it? That's almost more the question. I don't know.
Well,
I don't want to be a pessimist. I really don't.
Yeah.
I wonder how much this will really force us to change the status quo. I think you make a lot of good points. I think we should change the status quo. I think it's a great kind of tipping point for saying we can make things better, we can be more efficient, or we can be more deliberate, or we can be more careful, and we can change. This is a good chance to change a lot of things that need to be changed. The question is just going to be whether that actually happens or not.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of people that could argue that yes, we want to change things, and I think there are just as many people that will argue no. Everybody needs a job. What are you going to do? Does having a job suddenly become a privilege? Is it now a privilege that I can earn money and keep my job? Whereas someone in a restaurant or who drove a truck before, what gives them less right than me to have a job? I guess that kind of becomes maybe a more existential question. But
okay, now let me ask you this: is your value of a human being dependent upon your paycheck?
it shouldn't be. But
I'm
again,
not asking should or shouldn't. I am asking
right.
you personally.
No, I don't think it is. Of course not.
Okay.
But again, there are people, but there is a reality to the fact that, again, I can afford food. I'm still making a paycheck. I have a lot of friends that don't have a job right now, that
Yep.
can't get food, that can't do a lot of things, and it's all dependent on the fact that I happen to have a job that I could do from home.
Yeah. And we have apparently run out of the money that was set aside to actually help people with that,
yes.
because it all went to people who already had millions in the bank. I mean, that's, again, there is a difference between what is actually technically possible, what we could do, and what we have the political will to do.
Right.
And so the optimist in me looks at this and wonders, okay, is this thing going to hurt enough that it will actually help us find the political will to make changes that have kind of been long overdue anyway, and changes that are going to be more suited to the technical realities of our future?
And then you kind of run into that same problem of if we do things right and we prevent deaths, the answer is no, it's not going to hurt enough. So what do you want to happen?
Oh, but it will, because if we do that and we say, okay, everything can open up again, and then you get slammed with another wave that's worse than the first. I mean, it's not like you really can, oh, everything's better now, we can open up now, and that works.
Well, that's what I mean. At some point, probably this fall and maybe sooner, there's going to be whether it's intelligent or not, we know what we think as scientists, there's going to be a free form experiment going on that's going to throw a lot of people into exposure with this.
That's right.
There's no way around this now.
Yeah. Except, again, if you look at it, so coming out of the current wave, so few people will have had this, that we could have another wave like this one again and still be essentially as vulnerable as we were on day one.
Right.
There is a path forward that doesn't have to have everybody exposed in that way.
Right.
And we could have a long talk. In fact, it might be fun to do one of these things talking about the vaccine issue, but because I think between the vaccine issue, between some things that's a different conversation. I am more optimistic than you are on that score.
Next week, maybe.
Next week. Yeah, that'd be a fun one.
It's been about 40 minutes now, so just keeping people on time.
But there is, if we can continue what we're doing right now for long enough to get this thing down to the point that now public health measures like contact tracing really have a chance to work, we're not going to go back to the way it was.
No.
Because if we go back to the way it was, people just start dying in droves again. And I would like to think that maybe the average American has a little more basic humanity than to be okay with that. But if we can do the right thing now, get it down to the point that now we can open up in at some level doing contact tracing and such as that, as treatments get better, when a vaccine comes along, then there is a path back that does not require the kind of physical suffering and the kind of challenge that you're talking about, Dave. Aren't we better than that?
I hope so. I
Hope so,
really
yeah.
hope so. Yeah. But
That's
I
gonna
think
be
we
the
can
question
explore. Sorry, Allison?
That's going to be the question that ends up getting answered, I think, in the future.
So
Indeed.
how does that get answered?
Well,
Folk in your generation, Allison, you talk to people, you have what is the thought out there? Because Dave and I are going to check out. what can I say? I'm going to speak personally. I'm on the high side of 60. I have had some problems with lung issues over the years, including asthma. I've got an extra pound or two on. I figure if this thing comes into this household, I'll just, I've always thought that maybe doing acid would be fun. Maybe I'll spend the remaining few weeks of my life experiencing altered states of consciousness. I don't know.
Well, I'm glad we caught you on an optimistic day.
But Allison, for you, you're thinking now about the rest of your life, and that being a long period of time.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah. So is something different for you? Is it something worth fighting for? Are you content to just let that, if nobody does anything, and you just let the status quo trundle along, and that's what my life is going to be? Is that okay with you?
I didn't say that was what I wanted. I just said I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Again, it's very interesting. I think it really, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. It depends on what demographic you're talking to. I think it's very true. Again, if you look at even the last presidential election in the United States, it depended on who you were talking to as to who was going to win, and people were very sure up until the last minute, and everything else aside, I think it's the younger generation wants things to get better. That is, I guess my father's always told me is that generally, the younger you are, the more liberal you are, and the older you get, the more conservative you tend to get. Whether that's true or not, whatever. But I have found that to generally be somewhat true. Yeah, the younger generation wants to see this as a chance to change, but of course we're also the generation at this point, I think, that we're the ones who are concerned about feeding ourselves right now, or and my parents aren't. So again, I am personally privileged enough to still be making a paycheck, and I don't have to worry about that. But I see a lot of my friends aren't, and I think we're the ones that are too busy struggling with trying to just make it through right now. We don't have the resources to make that bigger push just yet. I don't know.
So you're saying it's up to folk like Dave and I to, there's a lot of, you hear people saying, oh, grandma should be willing to curl up in the corner and die so that the economy can go on for the young folk. I kind of hear you saying that, no, actually, Dave and I and folk like us ought to be willing to get out there and bust our butts to try to see those changes happen.
That's
for the younger folk.
Mm-hmm.
So I suddenly feel the weight of the world on my shoulders.
Again, I think it's up to everyone working together. We really need to, again, it can't be kids these days and okay boomer. Like it can't, we have to be working together. And it's hard to get that to happen. It's not impossible, but it is hard.
Yeah. Although interestingly, you need something like COVID to do it.
Again, maybe this is the opportunity we need.
Yeah.
That would be great. I want it to be.
that's a thing that's understood. You know, you get people. One of my complaints is that there has been so much identity politics of late, where it's my little group against your little group against your little group,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. When something like this comes along, all of a sudden now everybody, instead of my little group is us and your little group is them, all of a sudden the pool of who is us gets much bigger, because we've now got this common thing that we're having to challenge.
Depending on
And
your-
so
Yeah.
there is the opportunity, I think, me being the wide-eyed idealistic optimist. Life is strange. I work at hardcore cynicism and I just keep failing.
That's not a bad thing.
This, I don't know. Yeah, as you were talking about going from liberal to conservative, a friend of mine used to say that the difference between an optimist and a cynic was 40 years. But no, I am, given the way that people actually work, there is opportunity and even precedent for something like this to cause people to come together and build better things. There's a book, oh God, I forget the name of the author, but the title of it is A Paradise from Hell, that actually goes back and looks at incidents over history where there were horrible crises, and where on the one hand there were people that behaved very badly, but on the other hand there were people that came together and behaved spectacularly well. I've got a wife. We have a 10-year-old daughter. I have 3 grown daughters. We have 4 grandkids. I cannot afford to be anything other than optimistic.
No, I mean, again, I think this can be a great opportunity, and I would like to see it turn into one. And there is historical precedent for that.
Yeah.
So, you know, yeah, I think it's definitely possible. People have to put in the effort.
Let's hope that we come out of this with a better world somehow and without losing too many people. And we'll continue to talk about this in a few days or next week.
Absolutely. So
Thank
are we gonna try to come back again on? I mean, here, talk about informal here. We're sitting here on live figuring out what our schedule ought to be.
Let's check into that.
Check into that.
We'll look,
Yeah.
we'll know.
Do we want to shoot for Monday again? Do we want to shoot for?
We'll have to look at.
We'll look at it. We'll look at calendars.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
If you
All
come
right.
over for dinner tonight, I'll make you dinner and we can talk about it.
Well, I'll tell you what we can do is I'll take the laptop in. What are you fixing for dinner tonight?
I think probably pasta.
Okay. I'll tell you what, I'll take the laptop in and I'll set it up in the kitchen.
Okay.
And you can fix pasta and I will fix pasta and we can compare recipes and all of that. And then we can set our computers down there on the table and I'll have my family there, but that's okay. And you can come and join us for dinner. How about that?
Very good.
All right.
Jeff Hester, thank you so much. Allison Klessman, brilliant. Thank you it was great conversation. I'm Dave Eicher, and we will do it all again at some point in the very near future. We'll talk not only about the extraordinary situation that we're in, but also about science, maybe astronomy and some other sciences too.
Yeah, fun stuff.
We didn't even get to Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr and their arguments today yet.
We'll get there eventually.
Relativity and quantum mechanics and all that good stuff. We have a lot to talk about yet.
We do.
Thanks you guys for everything. We'll do it again very soon. Thank you for joining us, and let us hear from you on social media, on Facebook or wherever, what you thought of this, and get involved. We'd love to hear what you think of all this stuff that's going on.
Take
See you
care.
soon.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.